Let's talk about orthodontic brackets, especially self-ligating brackets. But before we talk about that, let's talk about conventional brackets. So conventional brackets look like this. They usually have four wings. Sometimes they have a hook, and they have a wire slot that's pretty similar in size to the largest wire you use, which is either a 19 by 25 stainless steel or the 21 by 25 stainless steel. So it fits the bracket very snugly. And the one thing, because of that snug fit, you get really good torque control and angulation control, but the wire or the tooth have a hard time sliding on the wire because you got a lot of friction, okay? Now, the other thing these brackets have is the mesh pad, so you can cement it on the tooth, and here you can see this is a hook. And usually you only see the hooks on these brackets on 5s, 4s, and the 3s. So these are the conventional brackets. Now, with these conventional brackets, you do have to tie them in. You have to use a ligature tie or an elastic tie. I like to use both just so that the tooth doesn't shift if the elastic tie breaks off, but some doctors only use the elastic tie. I do like to use the steel ligature tie and put the elastic tie on top of that just for the looks. Now, to make these things easier, self-ligating brackets were invented, where there's like 1,000 different designs. They all have the similar setup. They just have some kind of a door that you can open and close. So instead of using a tie around the bracket wings, all you do is you just close this door. Now, the other thing that these brackets have, these self-ligating brackets, is usually they have a little bit larger bracket slot. So what happens, you get less friction. So the bracket slides on the wire much more easily. So they call it frictionless. I mean, it's not frictionless, but there's just less friction. Now, with that, there comes a little trade-off, because when you make these bracket slots a little bit bigger, you get less of a torque control, and also you get less of a angulation control, because there's more of a wire play inside the slot. It's kind of like using a smaller wire. So if these slots are a little bit bigger, then you get less friction, but you get less control, especially for torque. But the tooth is going to slide on the bracket much more easily. Now, so these are all important differences between a conventional bracket and a self-ligating bracket. Now, the other thing we need to talk about that's important with brackets, the wider the bracket is, the easier it is to control rotations as well as correct crowding. So the more narrow the bracket, the more aesthetic it is, but it is harder to rotate the tooth because the lever is much smaller, because the bracket is much more narrow. So that's an important aspect to keep in mind. Now, these self-ligating brackets, or any brackets really, if you make them more narrow, then you're just going to have a little bit harder time correcting a lot of crowding. So it works better if there's not as much crowding, or sometimes you even have to do some wire bending, which we don't really want to do. Now, one of the issues with the conventional bracket is that you have to use the steel ligature tie or the elastic tie, so it's just a little bit time consuming. Now, the self-ligating bracket is supposed to solve that problem, because all you have to do is just open and close this door. Now, the problem with this is it's time consuming. A problem with the self-ligating ones, if you get any cement, like if you're sloppy when you put these brackets on and cement gets around these doors, that's going to ruin this door, and you're going to have to take the bracket off and put a new one on. The other thing that's a problem with them is if you're not super gentle with these doors, you can actually kind of bend it. Like if you use a lot of force to open it and close it, these doors can actually bend. So that's the other problem. Now, the fourth problem with these is because there's a lot more mechanism that goes into this than a simple bracket like that. You can buy these brackets very, very cheap, very inexpensive. Even the ones that made in the US, you can buy them for anywhere between $1 to $4. These self-ligating brackets tend to be a lot more expensive because there's more goes into to making these doors. And again, they all work the same. They all tend to have some kind of a door mechanism that you open and close, and that's how you put the wire in. And this is kind of like the big picture. This is what it looks like when you open a door, and this is what it looks like when you close the door. Here's again a self-ligating brackets. They're very nice. They're very small. They're very clean looking. I do like the way they look. Like I said, the only thing you have to watch with them is the brackets tend to be very narrow a lot of times, and then it's rather difficult to correct the rotations and crowding. So sometimes you have to reposition these brackets, or you have to do some wire bending. Now, the other thing that you have to keep in mind, see these little stops here? These are actually crimpable stops. Sometimes with these self-ligating brackets, because there's less friction, the wire slides on these teeth very easily. So you have to do this. You have to put these crimpable stops here that prevents the wire from running side to side, especially when you're on a smaller wire. Like looks like this looks like a 14 wire, or maybe a 16 by 16. Looks like a 14 to me. me. And then you're gonna have to use these crimpable stops to prevent the wire from sliding side to side, which usually you don't have to use this with conventional brackets. And again, here's the difference between conventional brackets with a tie, and this is an elastic tie. You can also use the ligature underneath it. This creates a lot of friction, so it's difficult to close spaces, especially with extraction cases sometimes. And this is the self-ligating one that just simply has a door. And then the way they work is, again, you just use an instrument and you open and close this door. And they all work a little bit differently, but it's the same idea, so don't get confused about that. Now, some bracket systems will make the claim that, you don't have to do extractions if they use their magical brackets, and that's just simply not the case, because these brackets have nothing to do whether or not the patient needs extractions or not. If a patient has, 14 millimeters of crowding, you're not going to be able, especially on the lower arch, you're not going to be able to fit all those teeth into the arch without have to do extractions. So these bracket systems really have nothing to do with whether or not you're going to have to do extractions or not. But again, as a review, some of the advantages with these brackets: they're very, very convenient. All you have to do is just open these doors, put the wires inside the bracket slot, close the door, and then you're done. And then some of the disadvantages, and it's not just with the self-ligating ones, but it's an issue with any bracket systems used. The more narrow the bracket is, the harder time you're going to have to correct rotations, because the lever arm is smaller. And then the other thing that you have to keep in mind, like I said, the wire play inside these brackets. You're going to have to use these crimpable stops right next to the brackets so the wire doesn't slide. So these are really the comparisons between them. And the other thing you have to keep in mind is really the cost. So I can't really tell you which one to use. I always tell doctors to try it. Self-ligating brackets are great if you have a need for them. It is much easier to close spaces with them because the teeth slides better on them. I do like brackets that come with the cement already. 3M makes those, and I don't think self-ligating brackets come like that. So I don't use self-ligating brackets as often as I do with just like conventional brackets. But there's all kinds of different mechanisms. There's the 3M system, the Damon system. They all tend to have similar setups with the door and everything. I like these conventional brackets just because they already come with the cement, so they're just very fast for me to use. But you have the disadvantage that you have to tie it in with the ligature or the elastic tie. So hopefully this helps, knowing the difference between self-ligating and non-self-ligating brackets. The cost for the self-ligating brackets can be significantly more. You can get pretty nice brackets for about $1 each, but some of these self-ligating brackets could be anywhere between $9 to $25 depending which one you get. And so it could be pretty significantly more expensive. So I always tell doctors, just try it and see which one works best in your hand. And let me know if you have any questions. Bye.